According to the Daily Wire, a twice-deported illegal immigrant with a rap sheet allegedly brutally stabbed a man on a Charlotte, North Carolina train. Honduran illegal immigrant Oscar Gerardo Salazarno Garcia is accused of stabbing a man with a large fixed-blade knife on the light rail on Friday, leaving him in critical condition. He was first deported from the United States March 9th, 2018, before he crossed the border illegally again, and then was removed again in 2021, according to the Department of Homeland Security. He then sneaked back in undetected for a third time on an unknown date. He was previously arrested for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, destroying evidence, resisting arrest, using a false ID. He also has convictions for robbery and illegal reentry. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem called it a heinous attack, saying her agency has taken action to ensure he faces justice. Noem said that ICE lodged an arrest detainer to ensure that this particular stabber is not released back into North Carolina neighborhoods. But she said, we cannot guarantee the country will honor the detainer since they have a history of not cooperating with ICE. Both President Trump and the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, commented on the incident. President Trump put out on Truth Social a statement, another stabbing by an illegal migrant in Charlotte, North Carolina. What's going on in Charlotte? Democrats are destroying it like everything else, piece by piece. Meanwhile, over in Los Angeles, we were told, you remember, that ICE raids in MacArthur Park were terrible. We should not have any immigration authorities over in MacArthur Park, which is not one of the nicer areas of Los Angeles, MacArthur Park. Well, it has become a drug-ridden, terrible place to be, MacArthur Park. Not a shock. Here's some of the video from the New York Post. So you can see, these are people just shooting up in the open air. It's horrifying. This kind of stuff is just horrifying. People sitting on the seat in rows. An occasional arrest. The ground littered with used needles, people who may be sleeping or dead just on the sidewalks.
So that way, we have the fog lights.
Remember, the federal government was ripped up and down under President Trump for the great crime of sending federal agents into MacArthur Park, which we were told is a place kids play. I used to live in L.A. You generally don't send your kids unaccompanied to MacArthur Park. That is not a real thing. According to the New York Post, MacArthur Park has erupted into LA's fentanyl ground zero, a collapsing chaos-soaked war zone where overdoses hit by the hour, people die daily, crime crews corner the market, and what used to be a neighborhood park now teeters on the brink of total collapse. The park, the largest green space in the district, now hosts an unknown number of unhoused people, that's homeless, though on most days it's fair to estimate the population in the hundreds. MacArthur's unofficial residents are made comfortable by groups handing out food and even free crack pipes as part of safe smoking kits. So that there's no such thing as safely smoking crack, but the idea is you won't get AIDS. With tens of millions of dollars coming from the city to support the park's inhabitants. Along a narrow chute residents call Fentanyl Alley, dead rats lie underfoot. People are passed out in the open, fentanyl-fueled and dangerous. A notorious stretch locals say is among the park's most perilous. Again, it is turned into a complete disaster area under the auspices of a Democratic administration in Los Angeles, and yes, under Governor Gavin Newsom. I used to live in LA. I watched the homeless problem take over the entire city. Apparently, Zoran Mamdani wants to do that in New York as well. These local governance issues are going to be a major issue come 2026 and 2028. It does look as though there is now a solid move in the Kalshi markets. They're one of our sponsors. There's a move in the prediction markets, not just in favor of a federal decision to cut rates by 25 basis points come December, but a massive move. If you recall, in November, for a little while, it looked as though the markets had moved in favor of the Federal Reserve maintaining its rates, that it would not, in fact, cut those interest rates, that there were worries about inflation, there were worries about affordability, and so the kind of going logic was that the Federal Reserve would keep rates steady. Well, for some reason, since then, there's been a gigantic spike in investment in that prediction market in favor of the cut. So either somebody's trading on inside information, which wouldn't be totally crazy, or it is quite possible that the Federal Reserve is looking at the kind of slowing employment numbers and the relatively mediocre inflation rate and saying that they are more worried about an unemployment increase than they are about an inflation increase. All of which means that if there's more money injected into the economy, the stock market is likely to continue going up and the unemployment rate is likely to stabilize. Meanwhile, controversy continues over the immigration situation with regard to Somali Americans in Minnesota. All of this, of course, is tied into Joe Biden's radical open borders policy, and that is tied into stories like the story that we just saw in Charlotte, where people are repeatedly crossing the border over and over and then committing crimes. According to the New York Times, in the weeks after Joe Biden was elected president, advisors delivered a warning. His approach to immigration could prove disastrous. By the way, I do find it hilarious that these stories are now being reported in December 2025. So if this was happening 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, shouldn't we have been told that the immigration problem was an actual problem 4.5 years ago by places like the New York Times at a higher pitch than they were doing, at the very least? Biden has pledged to treat unauthorized immigrants more humanely than Trump. But Biden was now president-elect. His positions threatened to drastically increase border crossings, experts advising his transition team warned in a Zoom briefing in the final weeks of 2020, according to people with direct knowledge of that briefing. That jump, they said, could provoke a political crisis. Chaos was the word the advisors had used in a memo during the campaign. They offered a range of options to avert that crisis by better deterring migrants. Biden seemed to grasp the risk, but he and his top aides failed to act on those recommendations. A New York Times examination of Biden's record found that he and his closest advisors repeatedly rebuffed recommendations that could have addressed the border crisis faster and eased what became a potent issue for Trump as he sought to return to the White House and justify the aggressive tactics roiling American cities today. Former Biden administration officials told the Times that Biden and his close circle of confidants, including Ron Klain, Mike Donilon, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, and Anita Dunn, made two crucial errors. First, they underestimated the scale of migration that was coming. Second, they failed to appreciate the political reaction to that migration, believing that stronger enforcement would alienate Latino and progressive voters, and that a border surge would not be an important issue to most voters. And of course, that turned out not to be true at all. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, you know that creepy feeling you get sometimes like you're being watched while you're browsing online? Here's the thing. You are. Every time you hop on the internet, your service provider can see literally everything you do. And get this, in the US, they can legally sell your entire browsing history. Yeah, even that incognito browsing isn't so private after all. Who would have thunk? That's why I started using ExpressVPN. It's a brilliant app that encrypts everything I do online and routes it through secure servers. Since I started using it, my internet provider can't see any of my browsing history, which means they've got nothing to sell because they don't really have anything on me. I use ExpressVPN all the time. I'm using it when I go to foreign countries. I'm using it when I'm in the airport. I'm using it when I'm at a hotel. Here's what I really love about ExpressVPN. It also hides my IP address, so those annoying data brokers can't build a profile about me to sell to advertisers. Plus, it's incredibly user-friendly. You don't have to be a tech wizard to use it. They've made it so simple, even your kids could figure it out. All you have to do is tap one button and get protected. They've got apps for all your devices, and it's rated #1 by CNET, The Verge, and other major tech reviewers. Find out how you can get up to 4 extra months by scanning that QR code on screen, clicking the link in the description box below, or by heading on over to expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show. Again, that's expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show to get started. Well, the consequences of open borders policy have been disastrous, obviously. And the most obvious iteration of a gigantic open borders policy is not merely the number of illegal immigrants in the country, generally speaking. It is enclaves of immigrants who also came here legally through the expansion of the definition of asylum and refuge to include hundreds of thousands of Somali immigrants living in the United States. This is broken out into the open, obviously, in the aftermath of this $1 billion welfare fraud that encompassed a wide variety of members of the Somali community in Minnesota. The media have chosen to take one angle. Their angle is that it's racist to notice this. It's terrible to notice this. So, for example, here was CNN's Dana Bash going after the president's immigration watchdog, Tom Homan, on Somali Americans.
Are ICE agents stopping people because they look, quote unquote, Somali?
No, they're not. You know, the law requires agents are trained in Fourth Amendment training every 6 months. Border Patrol's trained in Fourth Amendment training. They stop. You can detain and question people for a short period of time based on reasonable suspicion.
That's, and what is that suspicion?
Federal statute.
Is it based on how they look?
No, their appearance alone can't raise reasonable suspicion. It's articulable facts, a lot of different facts taken into consideration. And the Supreme Court just backed the Trump administration up on this. I know a lot of the media says, the Supreme Court just justified racial profiling. That's not what the Supreme Court said. Supreme Court said they agree with the way these operations are being conducted because the standard of reasonable suspicion is being used by both ICE and the Border Patrol in the interior operations.
Again, the basic idea here is going to be, apparently, that it is very bad for Homeland Security to try and track down illegal Somali immigrants because it must be race-based, as opposed to the fact that there are, in fact, illegal Somali immigrants living in Minnesota. I mean, this is a point that Homan is making to Dana Bash. He says, listen, there is a large illegal Somali community in Minnesota.
There's illegal alien community, large illegal alien community there. You know, if you're a U.S. citizen, you know, you have nothing to fear. We're looking for criminal aliens. And also, if you're a resident alien, you have like a felony conviction by statute, you could be set up for deportation. So we're looking for public safety threats, national security threats, and illegal aliens. Nothing's changed, Dana, from day one.
Okay, so, I mean, he is right about that. Meanwhile, the administration is saying, listen, Minnesota, if you don't fix your Medicare fraud problem, you're going to lose your Medicaid funding. Why should the American taxpayer have to subsidize your state fraud?
Either fix this in 60 days or start looking under your couch for spare change, because we are done footing the bill for your incompetence. This administration will never stop fighting to protect the vulnerable Americans who rely on these programs and the taxpayers who fund them. We're going to crush waste, fraud, and abuse.
And that is Dr. Mehmet Oz, who, of course, is presiding over CMS, which is the service that has to determine whether, in fact, waste, fraud, and abuse are happening inside Medicaid. And again, apparently, the left-wing response to this is not to call out the fraud or to fight the fraud. It's to call anybody who notices it racist. So here, for example, is a host on MS Now asking Keith Ellison if they'll arrest ICE agents.
Should the police officers be, I guess, arresting ICE folks who they feel are using excessive force?
Look, the police chief, Brian O'Hara, great man, by the way, is well able to speak for himself. But I think what he's hoping is to prevent. This is why he's making the comment now, so that it doesn't ever come to that. So that ICE agents will observe the requirements of the law, and that and that they will know that we're not going to stand by and let them break the law.
Okay, it's unbelievable. You got Keith Ellison, that's the state attorney general in Minnesota, claiming that ICE is going to be held accountable to the law while he presided over a state that allowed $1 billion in welfare fraud from a Somali community allied with, wait for it, Keith Ellison. Ilhan Omar, whose district this took place in, she, of course, is very upset with the president of the United States for noticing. So she went after Stephen Miller, who is the immigration advisor, the top immigration advisor for President Trump, calling Stephen Miller, who happens to be Jewish, a Nazi.
When I think about Stephen Miller and his white supremacist rhetoric, it reminds me of the way the Nazis described Jewish people in Germany. And, you know, as we know, there have been many immigrants who have tried to come to the United States who've turned back, one of them being Jewish immigrants.
Listening to this woman gallivant around talking about the plight of Jewish immigrants to the United States during the Holocaust as a supporter in rhetoric of Hamas, Hezbollah, and every other terrorist group attempting to exterminate Jews all over the world, it's a little rich. Is this going to be a winning play for Democrats? I think not. There's a reason why the administration is focused in on crime and illegal immigration. Those are winning issues for them, and they have to wait for the American people, presumably, to get used to the new level of inflation that is just a part of our lives now.